Have you ever wondered who decides, not just who casts a vote, but who decides which choices are on the ballot in the first place? Who decides that a $1 billion weapon system is a national necessity, but universal healthcare isn't?
It's a question that sits underneath so much of our public life, isn't it? We see the outcomes, but the decision making process itself can feel like a black box.
Exactly. And back in the 1950s, a sociologist named Wright Mills argued it wasn't a vague they or the government. He said it was a specific, interlocking group of people at the very top of our biggest institutions, the power elite. And their world, their rules, and their power are the subject of our conversation today through his book of the same name. We're so lucky to have Freddie Williams, a brilliant systems designer, here to help us unpack this. Because this isn't just a history lesson. It's about the very design of the systems we live in. Welcome, Freddie.
Thanks for having me, Nova. It's a critical topic. Mills gave us a language to talk about something many people feel intuitively. He put a blueprint to that feeling.
A blueprint is the perfect word, and that's what we want to do today. Today we'll dive deep into this from two perspectives. First, we'll map out the architecture of this power elite, who they are and how they're connected. Then we'll explore their psychological operating system, the mindset that allows them to make decisions detached from human consequence, and what we can do about it. So, Freddie, let's start with that architecture. Mills talks about a triangle of power. It sounds a bit like a conspiracy theory, but he argues it's much more structural than that. What did he mean by that triangle?
That's the key distinction. It's less about a secret cabal in a smoky room and more about, as you said, a structure. It's about how the top positions in the most powerful domains of society have become interchangeable.
Right. And for Mills, those three domains were 1, the corporation, the CEOs, and the super rich. 2, the military, the top generals and admirals in the Pentagon. And 3, the political directorate, not all politicians, but the key figures in the executive branch, the ones who get appointed to run the country.
And the power comes from of those three. The people at the top all know each other. They went to the same schools, they sit on the same boards, and most importantly, they move between these roles.
Let's make that real for a second. I want to paint a picture for our listeners, a story that shows exactly how this works. Imagine a 4-star general. Let's call him General Smith. He spent 30 years at the Pentagon, and for the last 5, he was in charge of procurement for a brand new, multi-billion-dollar fighter jet program. He knows everything about it, the budget, the technology, the political maneuvering it took to get it approved.
He's the ultimate insider on that specific project.
The ultimate insider. The day he retires from the military, his phone rings. It's the CEO of AeroCorp, the primary contractor that builds that exact fighter jet. They're offering him a seat on their board of directors, with a salary that's 5 times his general's pay. He accepts. Now, he's not a general anymore. He's a corporate executive.
And his job is now to increase shareholder value for AeroCorp.
Precisely. A year later, who was in the halls of Congress lobbying for an even bigger defense budget, specifically for more of those jets? Well, it's a team of lobbyists from AeroCorp, and they're being advised by their newest board member, the former General Smith, who knows exactly which buttons to push. And maybe the person they're lobbying is a former colleague from the White House, who is now a key congressperson on the Armed Services Committee. It's a closed loop.
That is a perfect illustration. And from a systems design perspective, what you've just described is a feature, not a bug, of a poorly designed system. There's no firewall between the regulator and the regulated. The feedback loops are all internal to that elite group. The stated goal of the system might be national security, but the goal that emerges from that structure is self-perpetuation and profit.
So, when you talk about designing for alignment in your work, this is the opposite of that.
This is the textbook definition of misalignment. The system has become aligned to the interests of AeroCorp and General Smith, not the interests of the taxpayer, the soldier who might have to use that equipment, or even the broader cause of global stability. The incentives are all pointing inward toward the triangle.
And we see this outside the military-industrial complex too, right? In the systems you evaluate, like infrastructure or finance.
Absolutely. Think about a major infrastructure project, like a new highway. You'll often find a similar triangle. The top officials in the Department of Transportation, the executives of a handful of massive construction and engineering firms, and the financiers and investment bankers who structure the deals. They move between government posts and corporate boards. The result? We get infrastructure that serves the interests of those firms, not necessarily the communities it cuts through. The system isn't designed to ask, what's the most human-centered ecologically sound solution here. It's designed to ask, what's the most profitable large-scale project we can get approved?
So the very architecture of the system predetermines the outcome. It's fascinating and deeply unsettling. That idea of a system aligned to itself is such a powerful way to put it. And that leads us perfectly to the second and maybe more chilling idea from Mills. He says it's not just about the structure, it's about the mindset that structure. He had a very provocative name for it, the higher immorality.
It sounds so judgmental, but his point was more clinical, wasn't it?
He wasn't saying these are all individually evil people. He was describing an institutionalized ethical numbness. Mills argued that when you operate at that level of power, making decisions that shift billions of dollars, that deploy armies, that can create or destroy entire industries, the actual human beings affected by those decisions become abstractions. They're just numbers on a spreadsheet.
The scale of the decision detaches you from the consequence.
Completely, the immorality is systemic. It's the shared, unspoken agreement that allows a board to lay off 10,000 people to boost a stock price and call it right-sizing. It's the mindset that allows military planners to talk about acceptable casualty levels, or for economic policymakers to trigger a recession that devastates millions of families and frame it as a necessary market correction. It's the ability to do all that and genuinely believe you are doing the responsible thing.
This is the absolute core challenge we face when trying to build human-centered solutions. A system becomes inhuman when the people who hold power within it are institutionally shielded from the human consequences of their actions. There is no empathetic feedback loop. The pain doesn't travel back up the chain of command.
So how do you design for that? How do you code empathy into a system?
That's the billion-dollar question. And for me, this is where looking at alternative models is so vital. In my work, I've had the privilege of studying some indigenous-led institutional frameworks, and they offer a profound contrast. Many of these frameworks are built on a principle of relationality. You are not an isolated decision-maker. You are in a relationship with your community, with the land, with the water, and with future generations.
The 7-generation thinking idea.
Exactly. The system is designed to force you to ask, what is the impact of this decision on my grandchildren's grandchildren? It's the polar opposite of the detached, quarterly report-driven, abstract decision-making that Mills describes. The accountability is relational and long-term, not just financial and immediate. The design challenge for us today is, how do we start to build that kind of relational accountability into our massive, modern institutions? It's not easy, but it's the work that has to be done.
You're essentially talking about building an empathetic feedback loop directly into the code of governance.
That's it precisely. You have to make the consequences impossible to ignore.
So, let's try to bring this all together. C. Wright Mills gives us this powerful diagnosis from over 60 years ago. We have, on one hand, this interlocking structure of power, this iron triangle of corporate, military, and political leaders. And on the other, a psychological operating system running within it, a higher immorality that detaches these decision makers from the real-world human consequences of their choices.
Right? And for me, as someone who thinks about how to build better systems, the lesson from Mills isn't despair, it's a design brief. It's a diagnostic report that tells us exactly where the system's vulnerabilities are. It shows us the points of failure.
So it's not a reason to give up, but a map of where to focus our efforts.
Exactly. The key is to intentionally design for the opposite of what Mills described. If his system is closed and self-serving, we must design for radical transparency. If his system concentrates power, we must design for distributed power and diverse representation. And most importantly, if his system breeds detachment, we must, as we just discussed, design for empathetic feedback. We need to build systems where the people with power cannot help but see and feel the consequences of their choices.
A powerful thought to end on. So the question for all of us to ponder in our own spheres of influence, whether that's our workplace, our local government, our community group, is how can we build in a little more of that empathetic feedback? How do we make the consequences of decisions more visible and more felt by the people who make them?
That's the work. It starts there.
Freddie, thank you so much for helping us translate this classic work into such a modern, urgent, and surprisingly hopeful challenge. This was fantastic.
It was my pleasure, Nova. Thank you.
This isn't a failure of